My name is Evelyn Carter, and I'm about to tell you how I discovered that my husband of nearly 4 decades wasn't just cheating on me. He was quietly planning my death, and he wasn't doing it alone. Before everything fell apart, my life looked ordinary, predictable, safe. I was 62 years old, a floor supervisor at a regional hardware chain in Clearwater, Florida, and I had built my entire adult life around routine. Early shifts, coffee at 5:30 a.m., dinner by 7. Weekends spent fixing things around the house or babysitting our granddog when our daughter dropped him off. My husband, Richard, used to meet me at the door when I came home. Nothing dramatic, just a smile, a quick kiss, a "how was work?" Somewhere along the way, that stopped. It started small. Richard stopped looking at me when I talked. He laughed at his phone more than he laughed with me. He began wearing cologne again. Not the cheap kind he used to save for weddings, but expensive, sharp-smelling stuff I didn't recognize. I told myself it was a phase, retirement anxiety, midlife nonsense, anything but what it really was. Then there was Naomi, our daughter's wife. Naomi was 34, worked in private fitness training, and had a reason to show up at our house more often than necessary. She needed equipment stored in our shed. She wanted advice on home renovations. She claimed she was worried about the oak tree in our yard. Always polite, always smiling, always showing up when I wasn't supposed to be home. The day everything cracked open was a Wednesday. I left work early with a splitting headache and pulled into our street around 3:45 p.m. Naomi's black SUV was parked 2 houses down. I didn't panic. Not yet. I walked inside quietly, the way you do when you don't want to disturb anything. From the kitchen, I heard laughter. Richard's voice sounded different, lighter, younger. Then Naomi laughed, soft, familiar. When I stepped into the room, both of them startled like teenagers, caught sneaking cigarettes. "Oh," Richard said too quickly. "You're home early." Naomi leaned against the counter like she belonged there. I was just helping Richard look at the breaker panel. Thought something was off. The explanation made sense. Too much sense. But my gut tightened anyway. That night, Richard cooked dinner, asked about my headache, touched my arm more than he had in months. It felt rehearsed. The next morning, I went looking for my reading glasses. I thought they were on my nightstand. They weren't. I checked the floor, then Richard's dresser, then opened his underwear drawer. That's when I found it. A sealed tube of high-end personal lubricant hidden beneath folded shirts. Richard and I hadn't been intimate in almost 3 years. Not because of fighting, just distance. So why was this here? And why was it hidden? I put everything back exactly as I found it and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the man I thought I knew. I didn't realize yet that the betrayal was only the beginning, because what I would uncover next wasn't just an affair. It was a plan, and if I hadn't trusted my instincts that morning, I wouldn't be here to tell this story. What I heard on a hidden recording 3 days later made my blood run cold and changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. I didn't confront Richard. Not that day, not the next. I've lived long enough to know that accusations without proof only teach liars how to lie better. What I needed wasn't a confession. I needed the truth when they thought no one was listening. By Monday morning, I had a plan. I kissed Richard goodbye like everything was normal. He barely looked up from his phone. The relief on his face when I told him I'd be working late was subtle, but it was there. That was confirmation number 1. During my lunch break, I drove to a small electronics shop off Gulf to Bay Boulevard. The kind of place that still sold things most people didn't think about anymore. I bought a compact voice recorder, motion activated, long battery life, paid in cash. The clerk asked what it was for. "Lectures," I said. That afternoon, I called Richard from work. "I've got inventory tonight," I told him. "Won't be home until after 10. "Oh," he said, "too fast." "Okay, I'll just make something simple." At 6:30, instead of driving home, I parked 3 streets away and walked back through the neighborhood. Every step felt like I was trespassing in my own life. I entered through the back door. The house sounded different when I was sneaking. Louder, more alive. I could hear the shower upstairs. Richard was getting ready for something. I hid the recorder behind a bookshelf in the living room, wedged between old photo albums we hadn't opened in years. I tested it once, whispered, played it back, clear as day. My hands shook. 39 years of marriage, and this was what it had come to. The shower shut off. I grabbed a glass of water and waited in the kitchen. When Richard came downstairs, I almost didn't recognize him. Fresh clothes, styled hair, that cologne again. "You look nice," I said. He smiled, just barely, just running out for a bit. Naomi texted, "She needs help with her garage door." Of course she did. I watched him leave. 10 minutes later, Naomi's SUV pulled into our driveway. I stayed in my car for nearly an hour, staring at my own front door, wondering how two people I loved could move so easily inside a lie. The next day, while Richard was supposedly at a client consultation, I retrieved the recorder. It showed 2 hours and 11 minutes of audio. I sat in my car with the engine off, heart pounding, thumb hovering over the play button. There's a moment before truth hits when you can still pretend you don't want it. Then I pressed play. At first, it was laughter, small talk, complaints about me working too much, about how I never noticed anything anymore. Then Naomi's voice changed. "So," she said quietly, "did you call the insurance office?" Richard laughed. "Already confirmed. 350,000, all in my name." I stopped breathing. "That's more than enough," Naomi replied. "Once it's done, we won't have to pretend anymore." My fingers clenched around the recorder as Richard spoke again. "She takes medication every morning. Same time, same dosage. No one would question it if her heart just gave out." I sat there, frozen, listening to my own death being discussed like a budgeting decision. They weren't just betraying me. They were planning to erase me. What I uncovered next proved this wasn't Naomi's first time destroying a life, and I realized I was just one name on a much longer list. I didn't cry after listening to that recording. Shock does strange things to you. It sharpens you, turns fear into focus. I sat there in my car long after the audio ended, staring at the dashboard, replaying every word in my head until it stopped sounding real. But it was real, and that meant I had a choice to make. I could confront them and hope guilt saved me, or I could assume they were smarter, colder, and already further along than I realized. I chose the second option. That night, I flushed every pill in my medicine cabinet down the toilet, every single one. Then I lay awake beside Richard, listening to his breathing, wondering how many nights he'd lain there, thinking about a future without me in it. The next morning, I called in sick. Instead of resting, I parked across the street from Naomi's apartment complex just after sunrise. If she and Richard were planning my death, I needed to know who I was really dealing with. At 8:10 a.m., Naomi came out wearing workout clothes and climbed into her SUV. I followed at a distance. Her first stop wasn't a gym. It was a grocery store in Largo, where she picked up a small bag. From there, she drove to a gated neighborhood I couldn't afford even on my best salary. Perfect lawns, cameras on every corner. She parked in front of a large stucco house. A man answered the door, mid-60s, silver hair, designer watch. Naomi stepped inside like she owned the place. She stayed for almost an hour. When she came out, her hair was messy, her smile satisfied. My stomach turned. She drove next to a waterfront condo in Bel Air, then a townhome near Safety Harbor. Same pattern, same routine, different men. By noon, I had followed her to 4 homes. That's when it hit me. Naomi wasn't just having an affair with my husband. She was running a system. I sat in a fast food parking lot and replayed the recording in my head. The way she talked about money, the calm certainty, the confidence. I knew that tone. It was the voice of someone who had done this before. That afternoon, I knocked on the door of the first house she'd visited. The man who answered looked confused when he saw me. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said carefully. "My name is Evelyn Carter. I need to ask you something difficult. Are you involved with Naomi Brooks?" His face drained of color. "She told me she was divorced," he whispered. "She said she loved me." I asked about money. He didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. "She helped me update my will," he finally said. Just to make things easier, I thanked him and walked away, my hands shaking. By the end of the day, I had spoken to 2 more men. Same story, same manipulation, same financial trail. Naomi wasn't a mistake in my marriage. She was a predator, and Richard wasn't just betraying me. He was helping her hunt. Once I understood who Naomi really was, I stopped thinking about survival and started thinking about exposure. By the time I got home that evening, I wasn't scared anymore. Fear assumes you're powerless. I wasn't. I just hadn't accepted it yet. I sat at the kitchen table long after dark, lights off, listening to the refrigerator hum and thinking through everything I knew. Naomi wasn't impulsive. She was methodical. She targeted people with assets, loneliness, and routines. Richard wasn't her first accomplice. He was just the one who lived with the biggest payout. And I was inconveniently still alive. If they planned to make my death look natural, then time mattered. Every day I stayed alive was a problem they needed to solve. That's when I stopped asking how to protect myself and started asking how to make them expose themselves. I needed proof that didn't depend on my word alone, proof that forced consequences. The next morning, I went back to work like nothing had changed. I smiled, I joked, I pretended to be the same woman who worried about inventory reports and broken tile saws, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. I had spent years managing people, safety procedures, and supply chains. I knew how systems worked. More importantly, I knew how they failed. That night, I tested something simple. I told Richard I'd be late again. He didn't question it. That was answer enough. Instead of parking far away this time, I sat 2 blocks over with a clear view of our driveway. At 6:12 p.m., Naomi arrived, right on schedule. I waited 30 minutes, then walked quietly through the back door. The house smelled different. Candles, wine, someone else's comfort layered over my own space. I didn't go upstairs. I planted a second recorder, smaller, harder to find. This one went beneath the bed frame in the guest room across from ours. The walls were thin. Sound carried. Then I left. I sat in my car and waited. Heart steady, breathing slow. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger clouds judgment. I was focused. The next day, I retrieved the device. What I heard made the first recording feel tame. They talked about dosage, about timelines, about how long before anyone would question the insurance payout. She's predictable, Richard said. Same breakfast, same routine, same trust. Naomi laughed softly. Then, this will be easy. They joked about where they'd go afterward, about selling the house, about how people would feel bad for him. They were already grieving me. That night, I looked at Richard across the dinner table and realized something chilling. He didn't see me as a person anymore. I was a delay, a number, a problem waiting to be solved. And if that was how they saw me, then I needed to stop behaving like a victim and start behaving like a variable they hadn't accounted for. I opened my laptop and began organizing everything. Audio files, dates, times, names, patterns. By midnight, I had a folder labeled simply insurance. I wasn't going to confront them. I was going to let them destroy themselves. The plan I came up with next didn't involve the police or confrontation, but once it started, there would be no way for them to stop it. People think revenge is loud, screaming, threats, slamming doors. They're wrong. Real revenge is quiet. It's patient. It waits until the other side is comfortable enough to make mistakes. I spent the next 2 days doing nothing out of the ordinary. I went to work. I cooked dinner. I asked Richard about his day. I even laughed at a joke Naomi sent him while his phone buzzed on the counter. They thought they were winning. That's when I started building the trap. Naomi and Richard relied on routine. Tuesday evenings were theirs. I worked late. Naomi arrived. Wine. Candles. Planning my future like it was a spreadsheet. So I adjusted one small variable. On Tuesday morning, I told Richard I'd be home even later than usual. Full inventory audit. No chance I'd be back before 10. I watched his shoulders relax. That afternoon, I gathered what I needed. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, just things I already had access to through work and years of practical knowledge. The most important piece was deceptively simple. A clear tube, something Naomi would recognize, something she'd trust. I waited until both of them were gone and moved through the house slowly, deliberately. I wasn't angry rummaging through drawers. I was calm, surgical. Naomi kept her things hidden in my home like she belonged there. Makeup in the guest bathroom, a spare change of clothes, and there it was, tucked behind folded towels, the tube. I stood there for a long moment, weighing it in my hand. This wasn't just about humiliation. This was about exposure, about creating a moment they couldn't explain away. I emptied it carefully. Then I replaced it with something else. Same texture, same appearance, different outcome. I put everything back exactly as I found it. That evening, I parked 2 streets away and waited. At 6:05 p.m., Naomi arrived. At 6:37, the lights in the bedroom went out. I didn't rush anything. Timing mattered. Confidence mattered more. At 7:18, I activated the next step, the smoke alarm. Not the whole system, just one. Modified, controlled, loud enough to panic, not loud enough to alert immediately. Then, I waited another minute and turned on the audio. Screaming, coughing, desperation. Not real, but convincing enough to do the job. Within seconds, porch lights snapped on across the street. Doors opened. Voices rose. Someone shouted, "Call 911." I started my car and drove slowly toward my own house, rehearsing my expression. Shock, confusion, fear. By the time emergency lights filled the street, my plan was already past the point of no return, because whatever they were doing upstairs, whatever position they were in, whatever they had just realized about that tube, they weren't separating, and they weren't going to explain their way out of what was about to be discovered. When the first responder opened my bedroom door, I realized I hadn't fully prepared myself for what the truth would look like in the open. I pulled into my driveway just as the first fire engine screeched to a stop. Red lights washed over my house, over my neighbors' faces, over the life I thought I still had. People were standing on their lawns in pajamas and slippers, whispering, pointing, speculating. Someone grabbed my arm. "Evelyn, thank God you're here." We heard screaming. My hands shook at just the right level as I looked up at my house. Screaming? What do you mean screaming? The front door was already coming down. A firefighter swung the battering ram once, twice. Wood splintered. The door gave way. I followed behind a crowd, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with certainty. Whatever was happening upstairs had already crossed the line, where lies stop working. The fire captain shouted into the house, "Fire rescue! If you can hear us, call out." From upstairs came a sound I will never forget. Not screaming. Panic. "We need help," Richard's voice cracked. "Up here, please." The paramedics rushed past me. I stayed back, one hand over my mouth, playing my part. A neighbor whispered, "Oh my God," like a prayer. The bedroom door opened. There was a long pause, a silence so heavy it felt physical. Then someone muttered, "Jesus." I didn't need to see it to know, but I did anyway. Richard and Naomi were exposed in every possible way, tangled, panicked, frozen in a position no explanation could soften. Their skin red, their movements desperate but useless. They were stuck, literally. Naomi saw me first, her face drained of color. "Evelyn," she croaked, "this isn't what it looks like." No one laughed. No one moved. A paramedic turned to the captain. "Industrial adhesive," she said quietly. "We're going to need solvents and transport." My neighbors stared. Phones came out. Someone gasped my name. I stumbled backward, like my legs had given out. A firefighter caught me by the elbow. "Ma'am, are you okay?" "My husband," I whispered. "My daughter's wife." The words hit the crowd like a wave. By the time they were carefully separated and loaded onto stretchers, the story had already written itself in the faces around me. Shock, judgment, sympathy, none of it for them. As the ambulances pulled away, I stood alone on my lawn, wrapped in a blanket someone had given me. Staring at the broken door, Richard didn't look at me. Naomi couldn't. And for the first time since this began, I felt something unexpected. Release. Because the truth was no longer mine to carry alone. What happened at the hospital later that night turned humiliation into consequences and proved they still hadn't learned how much I knew. Hospitals have a strange way of stripping people down to who they really are. By the time I arrived at Bayview Medical Center, the adrenaline had worn off, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. The kind you feel after surviving something you weren't supposed to. I checked in quietly and sat in the waiting area, wrapped in borrowed calm. Richard and Naomi were in separate rooms. Doctors explained the situation in clipped, professional tones. Skin irritation, chemical bonding. No permanent damage. They avoided eye contact with me like I was radioactive. Good. An hour later, our daughter Lauren arrived. She came in wearing her work badge, hair still tied back from a long shift, eyes scanning the room for answers. When she saw me, relief flickered across her face, then confusion, then dread. "Mon," she said softly, "what happened?" I took her hand. "We'll talk, just not here." She nodded, trusting me the way she always had. That trust was the only thing that still hurt. I waited until visiting hours were almost over before asking to see Richard. He looked smaller in the hospital bed, not fragile, just diminished. The confidence was gone, the ease. What was left was a man cornered by his own choices. "Evelyn," he said, "please, let me explain." I sat down but didn't touch him. "How long?" He swallowed. "A few months." "And the insurance?" His eyes dropped. That was answer enough. Naomi tried next. She cried. She blamed loneliness. She blamed Richard. She blamed stress. She blamed me, indirectly, by saying I wasn't present anymore. I listened. I nodded. I said nothing. When I left her room, a nurse handed me a small tube. "For Mr. Carter's skin irritation," she said. "Same for Miss Brooks. Apply sparingly." I thanked her and slipped it into my purse. That was when I noticed something interesting. The tube was nearly identical to one I'd handled before. Later, while Lauren spoke with a doctor, I stepped into a quiet supply alcove and made a substitution. Careful, precise, the kind of thing you only get right when you're no longer emotional. I returned the tubes to their rooms. Then I waited. It didn't take long. The screaming started 20 minutes later. Nurses rushed past me. Lauren stood up, alarmed. "That's them. What's happening?" I shook my head, playing confused. "I don't know." Inside the rooms, chaos unfolded. Burning, panic, accusations. Doctors demanding explanations. Someone muttered the word, capsaicin. I sat back down. Because pain, unlike betrayal, is immediate. It doesn't allow denial. It demands attention. And while they writhed in consequences they couldn't talk their way out of, I made a call. Not to the police, to someone who had been waiting for a reason to speak. The person I contacted next didn't just confirm my suspicions. They brought evidence that turned this from a scandal into a criminal case. The woman who answered the phone didn't sound surprised. She sounded relieved. "I was hoping you'd call," she said quietly. "I didn't know how to reach you without sounding crazy." Her name was Marianne Holt. She was 68, recently widowed. And until 2 months ago, she believed Naomi Brooks was the love of her life. We met the next morning at a small cafe near the hospital. Marianne brought a folder so thick it barely fit inside her purse. Thanks statements, text messages, photos, voice notes saved because something in her gut told her not to delete them. "She told me Richard was sick," Marianne said, stirring her coffee with shaking hands. "That you were emotionally abusive, that she was helping him cope." I didn't interrupt. I let her talk. She asked for money slowly. A few thousand here, then more. Said it was for legal fees, then investments. Then she had me add her name to my emergency contacts. My will. My chest tightened. She said once you were gone, everything would be simpler. There it was. By noon, 2 more people had joined us. Thomas Reed and Calvin Monroe. Different stories, same pattern, same charm, same manipulation. Naomi had been running parallel relationships, targeting older, financially stable partners, convincing each of them they were the exception. And Richard? He wasn't the mastermind. He was the shortcut. Thomas slid his phone across the table. I recorded her once, just because. I don't know. Something felt off. I listened. Naomi's voice was unmistakable. "We just need patience," she said on the recording. "Once everything clears, there'll be money. Enough to start fresh." There was no doubt anymore. By the time I left the cafe, my phone had a dozen forwarded files and a single clear objective. This wasn't about me anymore. This was a case. That afternoon, I contacted an attorney. Not emotional, not dramatic. I laid out facts, evidence, audio, timelines. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he said, "You understand this involves conspiracy, financial exploitation, and potentially attempted homicide. Yes, I said. That's why I'm here. By evening, law enforcement was involved, not because I begged, because the evidence demanded it. Richard and Naomi were still in recovery when detectives arrived. Calm, polite, unavoidable. I watched from the hallway as Richard's face collapsed under real consequences. Not shame, not guilt, fear. Naomi tried to talk, tried to redirect, tried to charm. It didn't work. They were escorted out separately, and for the first time since this began, I slept through the night. But the final twist didn't come from the police. It came from a discovery that proved how close I had come to not surviving it all. I thought the worst part was over. I was wrong. 2 days after the arrests, a detective named Harris asked if he could stop by the house. He said there were a few loose ends to tie up. His tone was neutral, but something about the request made my stomach tighten. He arrived mid-morning, notebook in hand, eyes scanning the living room like someone reconstructing a scene in their head. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "we need to talk about your medication." I felt a chill move through me. "What about it?" He asked me to walk him to the bathroom. I opened the medicine cabinet, now nearly empty. "I flushed everything," I told him, "the night I heard the recording. That may have saved your life," he said quietly. He explained that during the search of Naomi's car, they found pill bottles with altered labels. Same manufacturer, same color, same size, but chemically different. One bottle matched a prescription I had filled months earlier. "They weren't fast-acting," Harris said. "They were designed to elevate blood pressure gradually, to mimic a natural cardiac event." I had to sit down. "If you hadn't stopped taking them when you did," he continued, "you likely wouldn't have made it another 3 or 4 months." I stared at the sink, at the ordinary white tiles, trying to process how close I'd been to disappearing without anyone ever knowing the truth. Richard had been watching me every morning, timing my routines, counting my pills. The detective handed me a sealed evidence bag. Inside was the exact brand of medication I'd trusted for years. I signed the report with hands that barely felt like my own. After he left, I walked through the house slowly. Every room felt different now, smaller, like I was seeing it from the outside for the first time. That afternoon, Lauren came by. She looked tired, but steadier than before. "They told me everything," she said. "About the money, about the other people." I nodded. "There's more." I told her about the pills. She covered her mouth, eyes filling. "Mom, you almost—" "I know," I said gently, but I didn't. That was the moment it fully sank in for both of us. This hadn't been reckless behavior. It had been calculated. That night, alone in the house, I packed Richard's remaining things into boxes. Not with anger, with finality. I wasn't grieving my marriage anymore. I was grieving the woman who trusted too easily, and I promised myself she wouldn't make decisions for me ever again. What happened during Richard and Naomi's first court appearance revealed a betrayal even deeper than the one I thought I'd already survived. The courthouse was colder than I expected. Not physically, emotionally. I sat in the second row behind the prosecution table, hands folded, back straight, watching the side door where Richard and Naomi would enter. I didn't know what I expected to feel when I saw them again. Anger, maybe. Vindication, closure. What I felt instead was clarity. They came in separately, escorted, no longer touching, no longer aligned. Naomi still tried to hold herself like she was in control. Richard avoided the room entirely, eyes glued to the floor. The charges were read aloud: fraud, financial exploitation, conspiracy, attempted murder. Hearing the words spoken publicly did something important. It turned my private nightmare into an acknowledged reality. This wasn't gossip. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was criminal behavior, named and recorded. Then Naomi's attorney stood, and that's when the next betrayal surfaced. He argued that Naomi had been led on, that she had believed Richard was already planning to leave me, that she had acted under the assumption that the insurance policy was legitimate compensation for emotional distress. I almost laughed, but what came next stopped me cold. Richard's attorney claimed coercion, that Naomi had pressured him, manipulated him, that he had been emotionally compromised and fearful of losing her. I turned slowly and looked at him. This man had slept beside me for nearly 40 years. He had timed my medication. He had discussed my death like a scheduling inconvenience. And now he was trying to disappear behind her. That was the moment something inside me hardened permanently. Lauren squeezed my hand. "They're both lying," she whispered. "I know," I said, "but it won't matter, because the evidence didn't belong to either of them anymore." The judge denied bail. Naomi's composure finally cracked. Richard looked up for the first time and met my eyes. There was no apology there, just calculation. Even now, as they were led away, I realized something unsettling. They still believed this was a game of positioning. They still didn't understand that the most dangerous part wasn't what they'd done to me, it was what they'd left behind. The sentencing phase would bring justice. But what I uncovered afterward revealed that Naomi's operation extended far beyond anything the court had yet seen. Sentencing didn't happen quickly. Cases like this never do. While the attorneys argued timelines and intent, I focused on something else entirely. Cleanup. Not emotional cleanup, structural cleanup. The kind that prevents rot from spreading further. Because once everything became public, people started reaching out. Quietly at first. Emails, voicemails, messages sent through friends of friends. Women, men, people I'd never met. They all said the same thing in different words. "I think Naomi talked to my spouse. I recognize her name. She asked strange questions about insurance. She wanted access to accounts." One message stood out. It came from a woman named Denise Walker, calling from Savannah, Georgia. She sounded nervous, like she expected to be dismissed. "I don't know if this matters," she said, "but Naomi lived here for a year before moving to Florida. My sister passed away suddenly. Her partner benefited from an insurance policy that Naomi helped her review. That phone call changed everything. Detectives followed up. Subpoenas were issued. Financial records crossed state lines. What they uncovered stunned even them. Naomi had been refining this pattern for years. Different partners, different states, always the same structure. Emotional entanglement, financial influence, insurance guidance, distance when consequences appeared. Richard hadn't been her first, just her most convenient. When the prosecution added additional counts tied to interstate fraud and elder exploitation, the tone of the case shifted. This wasn't a local scandal anymore. It was a documented scheme. Richard tried to cooperate after that. Too late. He offered information, tried to minimize his role, claimed ignorance of earlier victims. But the recordings contradicted him. The timelines contradicted him. His own words dismantled his defense. The day sentencing finally arrived. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. The verdict came through my attorney that afternoon. Naomi received a sentence measured in decades. Richard received less time, but more than he expected. Neither of them would ever be free in the way they'd planned. That evening, Lauren and I sat on the porch, watching the sun drop below the trees. The house felt different now, not haunted, cleared. "You could have walked away," she said quietly, "after you were safe." I nodded. "But then someone else wouldn't have been." That was the real difference between us and them. They saw people as tools. I saw a responsibility. 6 months later, a final discovery in my own home reminded me how close I came to never seeing this piece at all. 6 months passed quietly. No sirens, no court dates, no whispered phone calls in the middle of the night. Just mornings that belonged to me again. Lauren moved into an apartment nearby, close enough to visit, far enough to breathe. We rebuilt something steady between us, not out of obligation, but choice. I stayed in the house. Some people asked why. The answer was simple. I wasn't going to let the place where I survived become something I ran from. One afternoon, while reorganizing the garage, I found something I'd missed. A small envelope taped behind a shelf. Inside was a folded note in Richard's handwriting. Dates, numbers, names, insurance policy references I didn't recognize, contacts in other states, amounts scribbled in margins, like calculations. I sat on the concrete floor and read it twice. Then a third time. Richard hadn't just followed Naomi's lead. He'd been learning, documenting, preparing. I handed the envelope to my attorney the next day. It was added quietly to an already closed case, not because it would change the outcome, but because it completed the record. History deserves accuracy. Life after betrayal doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with habits. Coffee that tastes better. Silence that feels earned. Trust rebuilt slowly, deliberately, with people who deserve it. I still work part-time. I still fix things. I still double-check labels. But I no longer ignore my instincts. That's the lesson. Evil rarely announces itself loudly. It hides in routines, in familiarity, in people who believe you won't look too closely. I did, and I'm still here because of it. If there's anything my story proves, it's this. Pay attention when something feels wrong. Ask questions. Trust the quiet alarm inside you. It may be the only thing standing between you and someone else deciding your ending for you. And if they think you're too ordinary to notice, that's when you're most dangerous of all.